Ryan Hoover, welcome. Guest number 3 on Landlord Confidential. So glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Actually, filling on my bucket list of being a podcast guest, so appreciate it.
Couldn't ask for someone better to be guest number 3 on our podcast. Longtime investor, realtor, you're into jiu-jitsu, lots of different things going on. Let's start with the softball though. Where were you born?
Sure, which is a little unusual here for these parts, but I'm a Valley native. So I grew up in North Phoenix area, so I went to Paradise Valley High School. Actually a second generation Arizona native, so as most of our population's transplants, I got a pretty long history here in the Valley.
Interesting. I guess, why did you get started in real estate?
So my story is not unique in the sense of like what the catalyst was, but I was actually in the hospital with my wife. We're getting ready to have our second child, and been going through that once before. I realized you need to bring a good book when you're gonna be hanging out there for quite a bit of hours. And I picked up a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad, which seems to be like the jumping off point for a lot of real estate investors, realtors that I know. It's just something about the language that just kind of clicked. Like I just knew in my mind that I didn't want to follow the traditional U.S. process of getting a good job, staying and working for 30 years, maybe have a pension, 401k. I just realized that I want to do a little bit more of my life, and the pieces on financial freedom and not trading time for money really resonated with me, and it was just put the words to the way I was already feeling. And then from there, it kind of got me motivated to start looking for my first investment property.
I think so many people got inspired by that book. Kiyosaki was just a genius. The way he laid out such complex issues in such a simple way and easy to understand. So yeah, definitely true. So you read the book. What was your first point of action then after reading the book?
It's a great point, because a lot of people get caught up and there's so many details. The process can be a little overwhelming. Once you make the decision, like, okay, I want to be a real estate investor, now what do I do? Yeah. So it's like most people start like kind of looking at properties on social media, start getting a little grasp of what the price points are, going on Zillow, realtor.com, and then, reaching out to a lender to get pre-qualified, start working through that piece. Then you started working through, okay, how do I analyze a deal? So, get a mortgage calculator, plug in like a asking purchase price, and then I try to find rental comps for the area, and still using those same tools like a Zillow. At that time, you used to be able to pull like closed rent data on there. So I try to find a little bit of a delta between mortgage payment versus intended rents. I already had the team set up with the lender, but I didn't have a realtor at the time. So I asked my lender, I'm like, hey, do you have a realtor you can recommend that works with an investor? He's like, oh, I got a great one. So put me on my way that way. And that was actually like the experience that really got me into the real estate sales side, because it wasn't any fault of their own, but that realtor really wasn't quite had the skill set to work with investors. So they were more for people for resale homes, which is more like, it's more of a passion buy, it's like heart over mind, something where you're going to live.
I look at the numbers, like, do you see yourself living here? Like, do you like the home? Does it pencil out versus, like,
exactly.
Is it a worthwhile investment with the ROI?
Yeah. So went through the process, and, it was an okay experience. We ended up closing on our first rental property, which was a new build condo at the time, because this was 2013. And at the time, the market was just starting to pick up from the Great Recession. So there was a lot of money coming back into the Valley for investing. A lot of Canadian investors throwing a lot of cash on a lot of deals. So we were getting outbid on a lot of stuff. So new build opportunity, and it looked like it penciled out the cash flow about $300 a month from day one, and don't have to put any money into it. So it was kind of slam dunk from that respect to get my feet wet in the game. But through that process, I'm like, okay, if this is something I'm going to do long term, I want access to the MLS for the deals, and I think I could offer a better experience to other investors if I was licensed myself. So that kind of got me on a crash course of going out and getting my license, and the thought was, I'm just going to use that for my own personal portfolio to be able to build that. But then once I kind of built some momentum there, then, I started to get some referrals from friends and family, and then it took off from that point.
So obviously, like a highly analytical personality, you decided to take a pragmatic approach from the beginning, and like that's what inspired you to get your real estate license. So you did the first deal with a realtor, and then by the time you did your second deal, you had your license, or?
Yeah. So it's funny because I got my first investment property, and from 2013 to 2016, the market was like didn't pick up like kind of like what we just saw over
It was like the bottom, right?
yeah, it was just kind of like flat. It was pludging along, you know. It didn't get a lot of appreciation. And after 3 years of owning that property and just having the one, I was, you know, at the time still like working in my normal 9 to 5 job, and like I was thinking about going a different career path in there. So I'm like, I think I might need that money for reserves for my life change. So I actually sold it completely out of real estate investing for like
But with no intention to get back in at that time, you were.
I knew I wanted to, but it was kind of like I was just pushing the goalposts like later. I'm
Sure.
like, I need to get some other things right in my life, and then I'll be ready at a later point. Hindsight, I didn't really love that decision, but some things have to happen in the time that they happen. And then what I thought I was pursuing outside, and like my career didn't end up panning out the way I thought. So I'm like, okay, I want to reevaluate. I'm like, I'm going all in on real estate. I'm like, this is like, I had the passion. I know it's what I should be doing in my calling. Like, I don't know why I keep getting pulled into like the old traditional way of thinking. I'm like, I should just follow like my heart where I'm at. So I got licensed. I had done like only a couple sales at the time for like dad and like a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
You know, it's typically the way we always start out.
Yep.
And then
They'll forgive you for making mistakes. It's the best place to start, right?
no choice but to use me.
Right.
So and then from there, I'm like, I'm gonna try a flip. So in 2016, I found like a condo complex, and like it was a 1983 build, looked like 1983 inside, like a complete time machine.
Yeah.
I ran the numbers, and I'm like, okay, I think there's a good spread. Like I can do a flip. I bought that property, and I didn't really have a good established like contractor team, right? So he's like a family handyman to do this remodel. This project went on for like
Way longer than
2 months on a 1-bedroom condo, and I'm like, I just so.
You're like, man, the cost of vacancy is killing me. I should probably get this.
The experience was like, it was good, frustrating in different regards. So we get done with the project, went longer, over budget, and I'm looking at like, you know, making a profit margin of like $2 or $3 grand.
Yeah.
Like, man, that was a lot of work to make that money. I'm like, the time on that return isn't really making sense. The realtor that actually sold me that property, who I kind of built a relationship when I bought it, she started talking to me about short-term rentals. And this is 2016. So this is like the infancy days of this.
Right.
I've heard of it, and I'm like, no, I kind of like long-term, you don't have to deal with things. She's like, let me show you a property that we did, and told me what they're getting in rents. And it was about like, you know, 2.5 times what long-term rental got. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm buying furniture. So that was it. I'm like, I want to maximize this property. I'm like, put a lot of work into it. So I furnished it and threw it up on Verbo at the time. It was like actually bigger than Airbnb. Like in this market for snowbirds, especially, that want to come out for Phoenix Open or you know, spring training, whatever it may be.
Great market.
So we got it up and running, and then like within the first month, like we were booked out for like 4 or 5 months. I'm like, well, that worked well. I'm like, so let's rinse and repeat. So bought another property in the same complex, did the same thing, got that one rented out. And at the time, to kind of where a struggle point is for a lot of people is like, how do you get the capital to get going at the time? So I was a little more aggressive than most. Like I leveraged myself like quite a bit. Like I took a HELOC out on my primary home. I took out a 401k loan from the 401k I had, and got these 2 properties. The thought was at some point I'm either going to sell or refinance my house. HELOC goes away.
Right.
Or, you know, the properties are going to make enough profit to pay that back. So I ran those successfully for a couple of years. And
Big appetite for risk. Most don't have that courage.
yeah, and that's the tough part when you're getting going. My mindset was always like, there's going to be like these 2 phases of real estate investing. It's like one's like the growth phase where I'm just have to kind of get razor wire like tightrope walk and really be focused on acquiring new properties and being like really creative. So that was one of the things within Robert Kiyosaki's book that really instilled me. It was like, you know, using leverage and debt to help build your portfolio. Those properties did good and appreciated over that 3-year period, and then able to cash out, refinance on those, get almost my whole initial investment out of them, and then go and buy some other long-term rentals. And that's kind of how the cycle started for me. It's like, once you get a foot in the game, you kind of got your property as your bank to start making you money and spitting off equity that I utilize and redeployed for other properties.
So you start with a brand new build, turnkey property.
Yes.
And eventually you're moving into short term where you're putting some money into it. And then eventually you move into long term traditional. Like, what was the transition from short term rentals to long term occupied?
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone that's speculated or dealt in this space knows that short-term rentals, they're more labor intensive, right? So the goal has always been financial independence. We all have the dream, and it's maybe a little skewed from what it really is, but like we think of passive income, like we're on the beach and our properties are making us money, we don't have to do anything. As you come to find out later that it's a little more labor intensive than that, even for long term. But short term rentals, it's like a new tenant every 2 weeks or every month. So I felt like I was Geek Squad over there. It's like people would show up and they're like, I don't know how to get on the Wi-Fi, or show me where the pool is, or what's the key, and I can't get in the gate. So it was just like it's constant with that. And then plus there's the turn of like just the consumables you don't really think about. Like you go through towels and bed sheets like more than most people like to admit, because people can ruin them from just normal use. But you're kind of a little handcuffed in that type of industry, though. I'm like, because if I go and try to collect that money back, I'm like, that's going to create a negative experience with this guest. They're going to leave me a poor review. I'm like, and now my algorithm performance is going to drop down. So it's always like I'm eating costs left and right to make people happy. You're in the hospitality space.
Exactly.
It's a completely different business.
Yeah.
So the thought is, I'm like, okay, I want to keep growing. I want to get into single family homes, right? So I was like, our 3 condo investments at this point. It's like I had the new build condo, and then these 2 supposed to be flips turn into short-term rentals. So, and then it turned into I want single family homes. So cash out refi, got a house at Anthem, Arizona, which is like a suburb, not too far from me.
Yeah.
And I usually like to find like light value add properties, so not complete turnkey. So I like to get stuff that was like early 2000 build that needed cosmetic remodels. So change out the counters, paint the cabinets, replace the flooring, get some fresh paint, and then really be able to maximize the profit on that, build in some forced equity, so make it a good cash out refinance candidate later. And it really kind of just went like that. So I bought the 1 property in Anthem that went well, get it rented out, stabilized, and then pulled out cash out from my other condo, and then buy another property in Anthem, same thing. And then eventually I was like, okay, short-term rentals are kind of turning into a little bit of a pain for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, and there's something on like the horizon I was always looking at is like, if we go into a recession, I'm like, hospitality travel is like the first thing that's going to take a major hit. I'm like, I don't want to be like holding a bucket. I'm like, I think I want to cash out of these now and just start converting to long-term rentals, because it was starting to go good at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't realize something like, a pandemic was going to hit, but that's what happened.
Right. Good timing.
I know. So I sold like right when the pandemic was getting ready to hit. And luckily I got out of it when I did. And then I took that money and then I bought, some more single family homes and just kind of started turning into that, like value add properties. And I'd go in, do like, at the time it was like a 20 to 30K remodel.
Yeah.
During COVID, we all saw those costs like, double, triple in some cases for contractor remodels, and then just kept on redeploying, like a slow and steady strategy, right? I'm not trying to take over the world and become like a billionaire. Like I'm just trying to carve out my own little niche.
Right.
So it's, 1 to 2 property a year over a long period of time. And before you know it, you got a pretty sizable portfolio that now, is actually performing pretty well.
Yeah. Are you taking advantage of, as an investor, of like the opportunities with the primary residence? Like what's been your strategy using a primary residence, and are you moving up every couple of years, or? So
I push a lot of clients to that strategy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I got a little later in my life cycle than my wife would allow for that.
Hard to move a lot with the kids, right?
Yeah, so we have traded up our homes for sure and made some good value there, but we've never looked at our home as an investment property.
Yeah.
So depending on who you listen, and even like Kiyosaki, Grant Cardone, they're like, your primary resident is like a liability. It's not your investment.
Right.
But I do think that is a great strategy for someone like starting out that does have that flexibility in your life. You can put, 5% down on a conventional, get it as a primary, live in there for a year, maybe make some improvements, buy another primary for 5% down, rent out your old house. So you do that every year, in 10 years, you're built out pretty good. We just were a little further along in life, and it's already challenging enough to convince a spouse sometimes to get on board with investing. So if I was upheaving us all the time, it would have went over worse.
Yeah, you mentioned you were married, had a young family at the time. Like, how did that conversation go about entering into real estate? Were you both fully on board with it, or did it take some convincing? Like, what was that dynamic?
Even now, it still could be a challenge,
Yeah.
but it's definitely gotten a lot better. I think something I hear quite a bit is like my wife's saying was like, well, so you're going to put like $50,000 out there to buy it, and you're going to blow I think those were her words.
Blow $50,000.
Blow $50,000, and you're going to get $200 a month on this property. So, like, this math
That
doesn't
seems
work.
crazy,
yeah.
So it wasn't until like I kind of showed her over time, like what you can get from people get so caught up on cash flow.
Right.
It's a metric for sure.
Yeah.
But it's always the one that everyone ends up like coveting so highly.
Right.
But when you look at how a lot of these investors have made their money over the years, it's through the equity, right? Appreciation. So kind of painting that picture, it's like, hey, we bought for this much. Look at the spread of equity that we have now from appreciation. We have mortgage pay down. Like we have depreciation and tax benefits that we're getting on top of the cash flow. So just showing that picture over time made that conversation easier. And then eventually I got her to like get engaged on some of the media I was listening to. Like I think I forced her to read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but it was like 5 years into the process. There's like a trust factor, right?
Right.
With every property that, was successful, like I'm building confidence with my spouse too, and myself on, I can do this and what I'm able to do.
Right.
And I always said, like, worst case scenario, if this really all goes sideways and I lose everything I put into it, I'm like, still have the career that I have, and I'm like, I was young enough at the time, to be like in my late 20s,
That's
early
the time
30s.
to take the risk, right?
I'm like, plenty of time to recover.
Right.
If it all went completely sideways, I'm like, but we get this right, I'm like, then we're going to set ourselves up for success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously been extremely disciplined. Like today, you still work your 9 to 5, even though you have a successful side business, probably making more money on your real estate side than your 9 to 5, but you've maintained that. And what's your portfolio up to at this point?
So I got my primary home and 9 rental properties. If you're a door counter, which some investors are, I have 9 doors for my investment properties because one's a duplex. And of all those, all of them are long-term rentals except for one short-term rental that's locationally close to my house. So it's not so much of a burden to manage, but even that has not quite lived up to the returns as like I've thought it is. So I'm in the process of working out whether I'm going to convert that back to a long-term rental or not.
Walk us through the process you use to underwrite a short-term rental. Like, how do you estimate how much rent you're going to collect on the property?
It's gotten a lot easier. In the past, it was really challenging. Now there's some platforms that have some calculators and estimators, really good algorithms. AirDNA is a really popular one that I've utilized before in the past. Back in the day, I'd have to go to Verbo properties in the area and like calendar stock based on like their average rent they were getting and how full they were, and kind of build a picture in my mind. That math was
labor intensive.
Yeah, that math wasn't super sound, right?
Right.
So it was like taking a little bit of leap of faith. Now they have some estimators that help. What's challenging is that a lot of people got in this space in like 21, 22, especially here in the Valley, because prices were going up so quick that it was really the only way to make the numbers work from an investment standpoint. Plus, we had the Super Bowl coming here in 2023, so a lot of people want to jump in and get a little piece of that money for the travel. Market got really saturated. So it made it really competitive, especially if you're starting up a new listing. A lot of the value is in getting the reviews and getting some of the traction in that.
Superhost.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'd hit Superhost and suddenly like I start showing up worse in algorithms, which is one of the parts that is, it can be confusing as people when you're really reliant on like Verbo or, Expedia or Airbnb to present your property, which most investors are.
Right.
There's not a lot of them like built out websites to like direct book.
Yep.
If something happens with the algorithm change, like your business is up in arms, or something happens with the HOA, dealing with neighbors is always a pain. Like, I get it. Like if someone had Airbnb, well, one of my neighbors, it would be my favorite thing either. So I kind of understand, but to your point on the underwriting now, it's using some of those calculators. You have to look at annual performance because it's a seasonal business, right? So summer, like you're just trying to survive here. There's not a lot going on that's going to bring a lot of traffic to the valley because of our weather, and the events all happen from like October through April. So you're really trying to make all your profits within that 6-month period. So you have to look at annual investment and then divide it out over like 12 months to see like what your monthly return is. And then once you start kind of running the math, you're like, okay, what will my performance be versus long term? And is it worth it? Like your time spent on it. And that's something that people have to work out for though. But it's like cool. You get really great Instagram pictures on a short-term rental, so people like that kind of stuff. And people have like big interior decorating passion. And it's a fun project. It's just sometimes it doesn't live up to expectations.
Yeah. What advice do you give to investors that bought during that time and maybe they're not experiencing the cash flow that they were expecting? As a long-term rental, it pencils out even worse. but they have a locked-in interest rate that's amazing. And so what's the advice to an investor in a situation like that?
That's a tough one. I think the whole industry as a whole is just dealing with this locked-in mortgage rate effect, right? That's why we have no inventory of anything. We're all looking at like, oh, the interest rate's the most coveted asset, more than the property.
Right.
Yeah.
So like people are really slow to let go. That's one of those ones you have to start analyzing. Okay, you're not hitting what you need on a short term. Like, are you willing to commit for like a longer process? Because I have seen that some of the competition has been dropping out of the market. There's been a lot of those, like fully turnkey, former short-term rentals being sold because for the same reason. They're not hitting the numbers that they thought they were going to. So you really got to look and say, do you want to invest and think it's going to keep getting better? Like, what's that curve look like on, whether it's occupancy or average daily rent that you're going to be able to get?
Yeah.
Make that decision. If it's not going to perform to a long-term rental where you want to hold it, then do we need to talk about selling this property and moving into something that is more focused just on long-term rental? Because a lot of these short-term rentals are larger homes with pools, in areas that do really well from that seasonality standpoint, but aren't always necessarily the ones that I would target for long-term rental performance. So, a traditional 3-bed, 2-bath, or a 4-bed, 2.5 bath, like that's the box a lot of us are in for long-term rentals, right? Some that's going to appease to the masses.
Yep.
Well, a lot of the short-term rental game has turned into how do I make the most unique experience and property possible.
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
now when you try to make that in a long-term rental, it doesn't quite fit. And it's kind of in the same boat that I'm dealing with, like with my short-term rental. Like I bought it as a long-term, that was always the thing. And I'm like, let me make another go at short-term rentals. I'm like, for one, I'm getting so many requests from my clients on like, how do I make this work? So by me actually having it, living it, like I can better advise them. So like, let me try going back to it. And I'm like, okay, maybe there was a reason I bought it for a long-term rental in the first place. I'm like, I shouldn't maybe have deviated off that.
Yeah, I know that for me, I've stayed in some great Airbnbs. The best one was a tree house in Flagstaff. It was in somebody's backyard tree house, so there's something to be said to that.
You're not going to make a tree house long-term rental.
No, you're not. Like, nobody's going to rent that long-term, but you'll stay there for a night. It was the most uncomfortable bed I ever slept on, but hey, we slept in a tree house. Felt like I was a kid again.
Yeah.
So obviously, like we talked a lot about your personal journey as an investor and building up your portfolio, but as we kind of mentioned in the beginning, simultaneously you've got your real estate license.
Yes.
You built up a great network of investors who you've helped, mostly out of state, right? Mostly out of state investors who've been purchasing here locally, and you've guided them through that whole process, calculations on RA, getting them hooked up with property management. Talk to us about that journey. I know that you leveraged bigger pockets in the beginning, and that's been really successful for you. And how did you get started there? And
it's kind of funny. So once my real estate sales business started picking up, it was more like owner occupied, right? I was doing really good in that space. I knew it was a goal of mine, as I mentioned at the beginning, to make it onto the Bigger Pockets podcast. I'm like, I want to be a guest on there. I'm like, so to do that, I'm like, what's step one? And this is where I guide a lot of investors. Like, what's the next step? I'm like, don't worry about step 100. Like, what's the next step?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, to be able to do this, I'm like, I probably had to have a bigger presence on the forums. I'm like, so let me start posting the local Arizona one, just some value add things, what's going on with the market. This was 2019. I started going on that. And then I just happened to have like some people reach out to me from out of state. It's like, hey, it seems like you know what you're talking about. Like I looked at your portfolio, like you're on the same wavelength of where I want to get to. I'm out of state, like I don't know the market, I don't know lenders, I don't know a property management company, I don't know contractors, like I need a team there. I'm like, well, your luck. I'm like, I have all that, you know, through my own portfolio and what I've been doing. So, you know, you start working with out-of-state investors, a lot of time and education, right? It's like, here's the market, here's areas I like, what price points do you want to be in, you know, what are your expectations? There's a lot of that is like, sometimes the expectation isn't quite living up to reality, so it's a conversation of getting people there. And then we start out like pretty broad in some areas. We start narrowing down the searches. I start showing like the tools of how I look at analyzing deals. And it's really helpful when they start kind of building up their own assumptions and spreadsheets on how they want to look at it, because maybe the way I'm going to look at like CapEx or adding money for reserves and repairs is some people are going to be a lot more cautious, as I shared with you guys in the beginning. I'm like maybe a little more risk tolerant than most.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so I help them kind of create their own criteria, and then, you know, we dial in on stuff. I'll go and tour the properties on their behalf. I'll send them videos, FaceTime, whatever it looks like, take pictures. Some people want that. Other people are like, nope, I get it. I already know what it is. Like, let's put an offer. And I really cut my teeth on, the negotiation piece, like being a really great negotiator, running comps, getting the data, trying to find out the intel and information, get the property under contract, and then, shift on to, getting under management once we close and dealing with all that. And then through that Bigger Pockets experience, then they reached out to me a couple of years later, and they were starting like their own lead programs. Actually, pay to be like one of the featured agents on there. So I get a lot of requests from people from all over the place, looking for short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, long-term. I'm really kind of choosy on who I screen to work with. If someone's like, I want to make $1,000 cash flow on one property and get to retire in like 2 years, I'm like, okay, it's probably
That's
not the same.
unrealistic, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to work with you.
This might not be the right market for you,
Yeah.
and I'm probably not the right guy for that. I'm like, because mine is more like long-term wealth building.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, we'll have some wins along the way. I'm like, but you have to look at it. The market's kind of changed from what it used to be. Like, you can't just buy 3 or 4 properties and then like strike it, with a decent amount of cash
Look
flow.
in Phoenix, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're like, if you can break even, you're like, oh, you're
Right, yeah, exactly.
So
And that's hard for investors, right? Like, how willing are most folks to get into the market and not cash flow at all, right?
exactly. So it's kind of shifting the conversation. Like, what are your goals? Like, do you love your job or like your job, and you're looking for like a long-term wealth builder? Like, yeah, we're on the same page. Let's go. So it's a lot of like qualifying. Like, am I a good fit? Because last thing I want to do is waste anyone's time, including my own. Right,
Yeah.
working with someone and not living up to what they're looking for. So that's kind of grown throughout the last 3 years, and really makes up like 50 to 75% of the actual clients I work with are now investors.
I know you're still active on Bigger Pockets today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get into the forums that post as much, but I do get quite a bit of the featured agent leads, so I still work with them quite a bit. And I have a lost sight of my dream to get on the podcast, so
It's going to happen.
this is the step in the right direction.
This is the warm-up podcast.
Yeah.
So you obviously, like, you've leveraged a great ecosystem here, like you said, lenders and vendors, property management. Like, talk to us about what role does property management play with your investments?
So I'm not going to toot your horn too much, but
We've had a relationship for many years.
yeah, I followed you around to 3 different companies now. But I think it's imperative, and I always communicate with the new clients that I'm working with. I'm like, okay, you did step 1, you have an agent that you like. I'm like, now I'm like, get the lender, property management on the front end. I'm like, don't wait till you get the property under contract and then to reach out. I'm like, because a lot of times I'm like, I'll give you my estimate of what I think that the rental value will be for this property. I'm like, and then you can run your own research. I'm like, then you should bounce it off the property manager that's gonna actually manage it. I'm like, and they'll give you, the guardrails a little better. Or they'll say like, we don't like this, or we prefer this. So I think having that on the front end is really important. It's funny too, because I get a lot of people who are like, I'm like, yeah, so you need a property management company? And they're like, well, I don't really know. What are your thoughts there? And I'm like, okay, 1, you're out of state. It's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
But 2, even if you are in state, like, what is your long-term goal? Because most people that get into real estate investing, it's not ever like, I want to have 1 or 2 houses, be done there. It's like, I want to scale out a portfolio.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's the goal, I'm like, will you be still managing all your own properties when you have 10, 20?
Right.
And the
You're
answer
going
is
to have
usually
the time to, right?
the answer is usually no. And I'm like, so my thought process is like, that's where I want to get to. Build a system out now that's going to take you there. So get the established relationship with the property management, have them deal with that. And like, now it frees your time up to go and do other stuff, look for more deals and make money elsewhere. You're not spending as much time. Unless you're thinking about getting into property management, if you want that experience, go for it. But where I think it's like, everyone always talks about like the late night toilet call is like the thing that scares everyone.
Yeah.
But like really for me, it's always been about like the screening piece, like getting that great tenants on the front end. Like that's where I think the biggest value is for me. Like first person that's willing to give me the amount of money, I'll be like, yes, let's do it right now. I don't want another day of vacancy. But having someone that has the knowledge and the systems in place to screen and put in quality tenants, that saves you from so much more headaches down the road.
You're known as the jujitsu realtor.
Oh yeah.
What's the backstory behind that?
So I never really intended to be a shtick or anything. I think you see the show Cobra Kai, the remake on Karate Kid, like Daniel LaRusso is like, kicking the competition. Like it kind of feels like that now. But no, I've been into mixed martial arts is what I first got into in 2006, with the popularity of UFC. And through that I started gravitating more towards like the grappling end of it. And I got into like a traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school where in 2008-9 time frame. And just always, I kind of fell in love with that, it's just testing myself and, peak performance of what your athleticism can do and learning new skill set. And, there's all these similarities that like really apply to real estate now, like all these metaphors. And that's why it's funny to me. It's becoming very popular on the real estate side. You'll be listening to a lot of like the big figureheads in real estate investing. Suddenly they're all big into jiu-jitsu. It's because like, concepts like leverage, like give me a big enough lever and I'll move the world. So same comes like financing and investing versus, finding the right leverage of a technique in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Same with like consistency too, right? So, I mean, when I post something on social media, everyone always posts like the best of everything, right? You have a filter and it looks really sexy, really cool. The background in most of it is not sexy, not fun. Like most things worth doing are grind.
Right.
Jiu-jitsu is one of them. Real estate can be one too. Like for as much as it's supposed to be sexy, it's this keeping consistent action day over day is going to get you where you want to be, like more so than any magic pill or like one move or, any kind of shortcut that might be out there. So, taking those things and kind of bringing it in. But then, there are like the kind of the laughable like marketing ones, like I'm not gonna say I'm like choking out the competition. or
That's rewind.
You just did. I might need to do that now. But
catch on.
or talking about going into negotiation and like I'm willing to fight for you or something like that. But it does show like a different skill set. So in this business, in real estate, especially on the sales side, like there's a lot of competition. I was just at a seminar lately, and it said that Arizona was like number 2 state for saturation of agents as a population. It's like 1% of the whole population is licensed.
Wow.
But there's definitely not enough sales to go around.
No, especially now, there's no inventory.
So you do want to find a way to stick out in a certain part, and I try to get people to understand me like as a person.
Exactly.
And then people that like you then want to do business with you.
Right.
Like, that's kind of the approach I take, and like I'm not over pushy and the used car salesman kind of approach. It's like, here's my value add, like when you're ready let me know, and like I might chirp on you every once in a while, but for the most part
Remind them that you're there, but not constantly on their face.
so I mean it helps like having a tribe, so jiu-jitsu is like my tribe I've been part of for like a long time, so that's a business too there and stuff, but you do want a way to kind of stick out. It's just always looking to find mastery in like whatever you do. So getting a little bit better at it every day. And I say 1% better every day. Like I'm not making huge gains, but keep consistent action day over day and keep getting better and better at whatever your craft is. So jiu-jitsu, real estate, my family, was like the 3 pillars that I kind of build around and creating my whole balanced life. At least that's the attempt.
Mm-hmm. You grew up in Arizona, so
Yeah.
you've seen Phoenix change a lot over the years. Like, what are you seeing in the future? Like, where are the up-and-coming areas in Phoenix? What markets have you excited about?
So I can be a little biased when it comes to this because I kind of grew up in one area of the valley, right? So I'm North Phoenix type guy. But, some of the areas of the valley are getting a little landlocked, right? So like Scottsdale's like mostly built out, Inner Phoenix is built out. So I kind of target areas where there's still room to expand a little bit. Mm-hmm. I do like being in a path of progress for investing because usually like you get a little far out and things kind of catch up to it.
Right.
And it helps to bring up, that tide a lot faster. So a lot of talking nationally about TSMC coming into the valley. I mean, that was an area I was already investing in anyway, but kind of targeting some of those areas around that, North Phoenix, so Peoria, Anthem, Surprise. I like those areas, especially for people that are just getting into the market. Yeah. Price points are right.
Right. Yeah.
But in the East Valley, there's similar things that I'm finding too, between like Gilbert, Mesa, and Chandler. Mm-hmm. But then those areas, it's tough to get someone like, this is the neighborhood you need to buy in, because there's plus or minuses to all of it.
Sure.
We can run the price comparisons, but I think the Northwest and then the Southeast Valley, like those are the 2 directions they see things kind of spreading out, and being in one of those spots, you're gonna benefit from all the new builders coming in and raising the price points by like $100K, and bringing up all your property values and so much growth and opportunity. What I have liked is we were so reliant before on like construction prior to the Great Recession as like one of the main drivers of the economy. Mm-hmm. And since then we've done a really good job, well, not we, like I'm a part in it, but like Greater Phoenix like Economic Council, like attracting other businesses and commerce types. So now we have like really diverse employment going in that one industry like takes a hit really bad, and we don't really skip a beat.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to set us up for long-term success that, to protect us so not so, tied to, what happened in Vegas and like Phoenix were usually like two comparables, right?
Yeah.
I think we've distanced ourselves from them by leaps and bounds, so as things change, we don't get as affected as we once did.
What are your predictions for the 2024 real estate market here?
I wish I nailed these because last year I thought we were like going to pick up and jump into like a great spring and summer buying season. Obviously, Fed and mortgage rates have been a big headwind for the industry.
Right.
Affordability has become a major issue. I think home prices appreciated at an epic clip from 2020 to 2022. We peaked out right around there, and we actually came down like 10 to 50% of the greater Phoenix market, depending on the neighborhood. We recovered some of that last year, depending on the neighborhood, but it's been like fairly flat, feels like, for the last 18 months. Just like waiting for a little bit of reduction in mortgage rates. And every time it drops down some positive news, my phone starts ringing, a lot of interest comes back, and then we'll get some contradictory
News,
economic data, and then suddenly everyone's perspective on that changes. But right now it's like we're hitting like this balanced market, so supply and demand feel like they're pretty close for once, but the overall supply is epically low, like as low as it's been. So homes available on the market, transaction volume has been the lowest ever. So we've been like a housing recession in the valley from the industry level. It's really just going to take a little bit of movement in mortgage rates to get us where we need to go. I think if we get, under 6 is going to kind of pop off the top of the market in my mind. And suddenly you're going to see a rush of people ready to sell their homes now because that threshold from the 3% interest rate that they're at now to like what their new rate is getting more tolerable. Yeah, and now we've come to terms with these higher rates for longer. So the thought of hitting a 3, that's gone away now.
Who knows if we'll ever get back to that?
Yeah, exactly. So I think once we get under that 6% mark, that's going to bring a lot of demand back in the market. But if we don't have new inventory coming online to deal with that new demand, it's going to get into like, another situation where you have multiple bids on the property. And I already see that in some areas that are very high in demand. House goes on the market, and the first weekend they're going to get multiple bids. It's like the tale of two markets, and houses that sell right away, and there's ones that just sit forever. So,
It's been a great chat today, giving us lots of really amazing advice. Tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to reach out.
Instagram is definitely one of the better ones, at jujitsu_realtor. Also, RyanHooverSellsAZ.com, or on Facebook, Ryan Hoover Real Estate.
Get investment advice by an investor himself.
Or jiu-jitsu lessons.
Yeah. You get wrapped up real quick. Awesome. Thanks for your time, Ryan.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you.